A rancher came in last night, sir. Says a man with nuts raises a boy. Calls himself...
The promise was carved into the Marshal's bones long before dawn broke over the frontier town of Red Hollow. He had sworn it beside a shallow grave, his badge cold against his chest, the wind howling like it knew the weight of his vow. "I'll find him," Elias Crowe had whispered to the dirt, "and when I do, I'll hang him." The man he meant was known across 3 territories by one name only: Jonah Black. Outlaw. Horse thief. Killer. Ghost. The man everyone said had murdered Elias's wife during a stagecoach ambush 6 years earlier and vanished with their infant son. Most folks believed the child was dead, lost to wolves, the cold, or the cruelty of men like Jonah Black, but Elias never did. Because a father knows when hope is all that's left. Red Hollow came alive slowly that morning. Dust rose as horses were hitched, boots scraped against wooden boardwalks, and a church bell rang once, cracked and tired. Elias rode in just as the sun touched the saloon windows, setting them ablaze with gold. He was taller than most men in town, broad-shouldered, his marshal's coat worn thin at the elbows. Gray threaded through his dark hair, not from age, but from years of nights spent staring into fires that reminded him of everything he'd lost. Children went quiet when he passed. Women lowered their voices, men tipped their hats. Marshal Crowe didn't smile back. He reined in at the sheriff's office, slid from the saddle, and tied his horse with a steady hand. Inside, the smell of ink and old wood wrapped around him like a familiar ache. Deputy Thomas Reed looked up from the desk, young, nervous, still believed the world made sense. "You hear the news, sir?" the deputy asked. Elias hung his hat on the peg. "If it's important, I already have," Reed swallowed. "A rancher came in last night from the North Ridge. Says there's a man living up near Widow's Pass. Quiet fella, keeps to himself. Raises a boy." Elias froze, not visibly, but something deep inside him tightened. "A boy?" He said, "Yes, sir. About 7, maybe 8. Blonde hair. Blue eyes. Rancher said the man calls himself Jonah." The room seemed to shrink. Elias turned slowly. "Jonah what?" Reed shook his head. "Didn't say, but folks are scared? Cattle gone missing. Says the man carries himself like he's seen too much blood." Elias closed his eyes for half a breath. "Jonah." The name echoed like a gunshot in a canyon. "Get the warrant ready," Elias said quietly. "I'll ride out alone." Reed hesitated. "Sir, you don't think—" "I know," Elias said, his voice iron hard. "And this ends now." Widow's Pass earned its name honestly. The land rose sharp and unforgiving, pine trees clawing at a sky that always looked heavier there. Snow lingered even when spring warmed the valleys below. It was a place men went to disappear or to hide from ghosts that followed too closely. Elias rode for hours, the rhythm of hooves matching the pounding in his chest. Memories surfaced uninvited, his wife's laughter, the warmth of her hand, the way their son had wrapped his tiny fingers around Elias's thumb the night before the stagecoach journey. The ambush had been brutal, gunfire, screams, smoke, and then silence. They found his wife's body days later. No sign of the child, no mercy. Only rumors of Jonah Black riding away into the mountains. Elias had chased that rumor for 6 long years. Now it had a direction. As dusk settled, he saw the cabin. Small, weathered. Smoke curling from the chimney. And outside, near a split log fence, a boy knelt in the dirt, carefully stacking stones as if building something sacred. Elias stopped, his breath caught. The boy's hair was too light for Jonah Black's dark blood, Elias thought. His movements were gentle, deliberate. He hummed softly, a tune Elias hadn't heard in years, a lullaby. One his wife used to sing. Elias's hand drifted to his gun. Then stilled. Because the man stepping out of the cabin wasn't the monster he'd imagined. Jonah Black was thinner than the wanted posters showed, his beard streaked with gray. His eyes tired, not cruel. He rested one hand on the boy's shoulder, protective without being possessive. "Sun's going down, Caleb," Jonah said. "Wash up, supper's near, Caleb." Elias felt the ground tilt. That was the name he and his wife had chosen for their son. Jonah looked up then and saw Elias. The outlaw's body went rigid. His hand moved slowly, not toward a weapon, but away from it. He stepped in front of the boy without thinking. "Marshal," Jonah said. His voice carried no challenge, only understanding. "I wondered when you'd come." Elias dismounted, boots crunching in the frost. His gun remained holstered, but his hand shook. "Where did you get the boy?" Elias demanded. Jonah glanced back at Caleb, who watched with wide, curious eyes. "Inside," Jonah said softly to the child. "Please." Caleb hesitated. "Is he bad?" Jonah knelt, meeting the boy's gaze. "No, he's just hurting." The door closed behind the child. Silence rushed in. Elias took a step forward. "You took everything from me," he said. "I promised I'd hang you." Jonah nodded once. "I know." "Then start talking," Elias growled. "Because if you lie, I didn't kill your wife," Jonah said. The words hit harder than any punch. Elias laughed a sharp, broken sound. "Everyone says you did." "Everyone wasn't there," Jonah replied. "Bandits hit that coach. I tried to stop them." "I was too late." Elias's jaw tightened. "Then why take my son?" Jonah's eyes filled. Just a little. Because when the smoke cleared, he was crying. "And no one else was alive." Elias staggered back as if struck. "You stole him," he whispered. "I saved him," Jonah said. "And I've raised him like my own, taught him right from wrong. Taught him mercy." Elias drew his gun. Jonah didn't flinch. "If you're going to hang me," Jonah said calmly, "do it knowing that boy will be alone in this world again." The cabin door creaked open. Caleb stood there, eyes shining in the lamplight. "Papa?" he asked. The word tore Elias apart, because he knew in that moment this was no outlaw's lie. This was a father's truth. And Elias Crowe realized the rope he'd carried for 6 years might not belong around Jonah Black's neck, but around his own heart. Thank you for watching. We'll be back soon with the next part of this gripping tale, where secrets deepen, danger closes in, and the past refuses to stay buried. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. The first light of dawn struggled through the pine trees surrounding Widow's Pass, casting long, trembling shadows across the snow-laden ground. Elias Crowe felt the weight of every year he had carried his grief, a heavy burden pressing on him as he stood at the edge of the cabin. Inside, Jonah Black moved quietly, a man who had spent 6 years hiding from a past that refused to let him go. He was tending to Caleb, with the patience of a father and the precision of a man who knew danger could come at any moment. The child's small hands were covered in pine needles and soot from a fire Jonah had kept burning all night. He hummed softly, a tune that seemed older than the mountains, innocent yet haunted. As the sound drifted out, Elias felt something stir in his chest, a longing he hadn't dared to feel in years. Every breath he took carried memories of loss, his wife's laughter, the feel of his son's tiny fingers curling around his thumb, and the terrible silence of the stagecoach ambush that had shattered their lives. That day had stolen everything, leaving him with nothing but a badge and an all-consuming need for vengeance. Now, standing here, that vengeance had a face, a name. Jonah Black? Elias stepped into the cabin, his boots crunching softly on the rough wooden floor. Jonah looked up, his eyes steady but cautious, a flicker of apprehension in their depths. "He's asleep," Jonah said quietly, nodding toward the small bedroom where Caleb lay tucked under a patchwork quilt. "He doesn't know what he's about to learn." Elias clenched his jaw, the muscle twitching. He struggled to reconcile the image of this gentle, careful man with the outlaw he had sworn to hang. The man who had, by all accounts, stolen his son. They sat across from each other at the rough-hewn table. The smell of pine smoke and a simmering stew filled the small space, a strange and simple reminder that life continued, even in places touched by profound tragedy. The air between them was thick with unspoken questions, with 6 years of anger and sorrow. Jonah spoke first, his voice low and measured, recounting the ambush in vivid, painful detail. He described the bandits, the chaos, the deafening crack of gunfire. But then he spoke of something else, something Elias had never known. He spoke of corrupt men wearing badges, men who had hidden behind the law while orchestrating the attack that killed Elias's wife. Every word hit Elias like a hammer. The burning anger he had carried for years rose and fell in waves, sometimes threatening to overwhelm him, sometimes faltering in the face of Jonah's quiet, devastating truth. The man he'd hunted wasn't just a kidnapper, he was a witness. Caleb stirred in his sleep, murmuring a soft, indistinct word, and Elias felt the familiar ache of longing twist with something new hope. He could see it in the way the cabin was kept, in the carefully folded blanket on the child's bed. He could see how Jonah had raised the boy with patience, teaching him right from wrong, showing a kind of mercy in a world that had shown them none. Elias hadn't dared to imagine such a thing was possible. "Why didn't you bring him back?" Elias asked finally, his voice raw, cracking with the weight of the question that had haunted him for 6 long years. Jonah's hands tightened around the tin cup he was holding. His knuckles were white. "Because the men who killed your wife, they weren't just bandits. They were lawmen from another county, working for a man who wanted me silenced. They were still hunting me. If I had brought Caleb to you then, he would have been next. They would have used him to get to me, or worse, to silence you too." Elias closed his eyes and leaned back, the wood of the chair creaking under his weight. He wanted to shout, to strike something, to make everything right with a single act of vengeance, but the image of the boy's innocent face, peaceful in sleep, haunted him. He could see the years of love Jonah had poured into Caleb's life, the protection he'd offered. For the first time, Elias realized that someone had kept his son safe when he could not. His vengeance had been a blind fire, and he'd almost burned down the only thing he had left. Just as this new understanding began to settle, the sudden sound of horse hooves outside shattered the fragile peace. Elias's heart leapt into his throat. He moved to the window, peering through a crack in the logs. He saw 3 men in frost-crusted coats, their eyes hard and their faces set like stones. Deputy Thomas Reed, his own deputy, stood among them, relief etched across his face, but something darker, a shadow of fear, lay just beneath the surface. Guns were drawn in an instant. The men outside weren't here to talk. Jonah and Elias exchanged a tense glance, a silent, unspoken understanding passing between them. The enemy was at the door, and for now, they were on the same side. Before a word could be spoken, shots rang out, splitting the morning air. Bullets tore into the cabin, splintering the wooden walls and kicking up sprays of snow across the yard. Caleb screamed from the back room, a high, terrified sound that cut through Elias's soul. His instincts roared to life. He rushed inside, scooped the boy into his arms, and whispered reassurances he barely believed himself. "It's all right, son. I've got you." Jonah moved with a cold precision, returning fire, blocking angles, protecting both Elias and the boy with a lethal calm that belied his weary frame. He was a man who had lived with this kind of violence for a long time. The attackers were skilled, not like desperate bandits. Every move they made carried purpose. Elias realized with mounting horror that these were not just bounty hunters. They were trained killers, coming for Jonah Black, but they were also testing him, the marshal, testing his resolve. Amidst the chaos, Deputy Reed was struck. A cry of pain cut through the gunfire, and he crumpled to the ground. Acting on instinct, Elias dragged him behind the minimal cover of a fallen log, the deputy's blood staining the pure white snow. The entire situation, the attack, the timing, it had all been orchestrated to force him into a choice. Follow the rigid letter of the law and punish Jonah, or embrace a more complex kind of justice, a compassionate one, and allow the boy's protector to live. The weight of the decision pressed on him like the snow-laden pines, cold and unyielding. The battle continued in tense, measured bursts of violence. Jonah, bleeding from a graze on his arm, stood back to back with Elias, firing only when necessary, his body a shield between the attackers and the child huddled behind him. In those moments, time seemed to slow. The past, the ambush, the stolen years, it all converged in the frozen air of Widow's Pass. The lawman and the outlaw, fighting together for the life of a boy who connected them both. At last, a heavy silence fell, thick and unnatural after the deafening roar of guns. 2 attackers lay motionless in the snow. The third had fled into the forest, leaving a trail of hoofprints that would vanish in hours under the falling frost. Elias knelt beside Deputy Reed, who struggled to breathe. He whispered, his voice weak, that the attack had been more than a hunt for Jonah. It was a test of Elias himself, a test of his mercy, his choices as a father, as a man, and as the law. The corrupt forces Jonah had spoken of were real, and they were watching. From beneath the cabin, where he'd been hidden for safety, Caleb's small voice trembled. "Papa?" Elias turned and looked at Jonah, the man he had sworn to kill, the man who had just saved his life and the life of his son. He finally realized the bitter truth of the frontier, that the law was not always justice, and that vengeance could easily destroy the very thing love had fought so hard to build. The choice before him was now painfully clear. He had to protect the boy. He had to honor the life Jonah had given him, the safety he had provided against all odds. He had to redefine what it meant to be a father, what it meant to be a man of the law. As snowflakes began to drift down silently from a gray sky, Elias knew that the decisions of this day would echo for the rest of their lives. They would shape the man Caleb would become, the legacy Elias would leave behind, and the fragile, flickering hope that even in the harshest wilderness, hearts could find their way to redemption. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales from the frontier. The snow still clung stubbornly to Widow's Pass as Elias Crowe emerged from the cabin, the weight of the past 6 years pressing on him like the frozen mountains around him. Inside, Caleb stirred, rubbing sleepy eyes as the first light of dawn spilled through the frost-streaked windows, glinting on the edges of the logs and the worn pine floor. The boy's small face reflected innocence, yet a wisdom beyond his years, the kind shaped by hardship, by lessons learned quietly from Jonah Black. Elias's heart clenched, seeing his son alive and whole, a miracle born from grief, courage, and sacrifice. He had come here seeking revenge, a rope, and a promise, but now he found himself facing a far greater challenge: to forgive, to accept, and to protect the child who had unknowingly healed a lifetime of sorrow. Jonah Black leaned against the cabin wall, his lean frame trembling slightly from his wound, yet his eyes calm and steady. There was no arrogance, no defiance, only the quiet resilience of a man who had done what he believed was right, even when the world branded him a criminal. Elias studied him for a long moment, noticing the subtle lines of pain etched into his face, the gray streaks in his dark hair, and the care with which he had raised Caleb. He realized then that Jonah was no monster, but a man who had carried the burden of a stolen life to protect the one person who mattered most. The anger Elias had carried for years softened, replaced by understanding and the beginning of trust. He could feel it in the frozen air, in the way the cabin seemed to breathe with them, as if even the mountains acknowledged the moment of reckoning. Caleb, sensing the tension, slowly approached his father. "Papa?" he asked, his voice small, uncertain. Elias knelt and gathered him into his arms, the boy's warmth a sharp contrast to the cold air outside. Every step, every embrace, was a stitch mending a broken past. Jonah watched silently, a small nod acknowledging the bond being rebuilt. "He's yours," Jonah said quietly. "But you have to choose what kind of father you want to be from now on." Elias's voice caught, the weight of the years almost too heavy to bear. "I'll be the father he deserves," he promised, and he meant it, not just in law or blood, but in presence, protection, and love. Outside, the forest whispered secrets of the past. The distant tracks of the fleeing attackers reminded Elias that the world beyond Widow's Pass was still harsh, still unforgiving, but for the first time he felt a calm certainty. They were ready. He turned to Jonah, who stepped forward, unarmed, and offered a steady hand. Elias took it. Their grip was firm, not of enemies, but of men who had survived the worst, and now shared an unspoken commitment to Caleb, to each other, and to the fragile hope that life could be rebuilt even after devastation. In the snow-crusted silence, the mountains seemed to bow to that choice, the wind carrying the promise of redemption and the quiet strength of human kindness. As morning deepened into afternoon, Elias, Jonah, and Caleb worked together to repair the cabin and its small yard. Each movement, lifting logs, sweeping snow, reinforcing doors, was an act of restoration, not just for the physical home but for the fractured hearts within it. Elias spoke softly to Caleb, recounting stories of his mother, of the mountains, of love that had never truly left them. Jonah shared tales of survival and mistakes, of the frontier's harsh truths, yet always tempering them with lessons of mercy and courage. Caleb listened, wide-eyed, absorbing these words like sunlight, unaware yet that he was witnessing the formation of a family defined not by tragedy, but by choice, loyalty, and hope. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting amber and gold across the pine-lined pass, Elias stood outside and watched Caleb run freely, laughter echoing through the crisp air. Jonah followed, slower, cautious, yet smiling, a smile earned through years of struggle and sacrifice. Elias felt a profound stillness, a clarity he had never known before. The rope he once carried in his mind, the vow to hang Jonah Black, had been replaced by a new promise: to protect his son, to embrace mercy, and to honor the lives that had survived against all odds. He knew the law, the past, and the dangers of the frontier were still out there. But here, in this fleeting moment of snow, firelight, and human connection, they had carved a sanctuary built from courage, trust, and love. Night fell softly, the sky a deep indigo sprinkled with stars that shimmered like distant hope. Elias lifted Caleb onto his shoulders, feeling the boy's trust and warmth radiate against the cold. Jonah leaned against the cabin, watching them, his own redemption quiet yet complete. The wind swept through Widow's Pass, carrying away the echoes of grief, gunfire, and loss, leaving behind only the enduring bonds of family, courage, and compassion. Elias whispered to his son, "We will face whatever comes together, and nothing will break us." Caleb rested his small head against his father's chest, smiling, unaware of the full weight of the day, yet feeling its significance in the safety of his embrace. The mountains, silent witnesses to suffering and redemption, stood watch over them, a timeless reminder that even in a land ruled by lawlessness and loss, love and mercy could prevail. And as the night deepened, Elias knew with unwavering certainty that the hardest battles against grief, vengeance, and fear were won not with guns but with the courage to forgive, to protect, and to love. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe for more tales of the human spirit.